Is that pretty cool? Perfect. Start training people to do it right there. I see you. You know Miss Smith. I know her. Yes. You know we were humble.
You put the light on or off?
You turn it off and see that. You want me to turn it off for you?
Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Mandy Fraley. I'm an instructional coach at Jackson Careers Technology Elementary School. I was here last session in November, you were here. So we're so lucky to get another session with me. I know you're excited. This has not been posted on the page, the curriculum page on the website yet, but it will be. They just didn't get it up there in time because I didn't get it to them quite as early as I did last time. Today, our mission is to understand the Common Core standards expectations regarding reading and all ELA within the content areas. And we sort of touched on that last time because we did writing, and because they're so intertwined, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, there's really no way to talk about reading without talking about writing, or to talk about writing without talking about reading. But the specific focus for today is going to be, we're going to identify practices and resources that we currently have in place that will support those standards and expectations in the content areas, and then practices and resources that we need to put these expectations and the content areas into place. This is just a common conversation that I've heard, and I still don't see if any of you all heard this. How am I going to teach all the content if I have to teach reading? If you're the reading teacher, the language arts teacher, or the English teacher, or the writing, isn't that the reading teacher's job? Is the reading teacher going to teach the science, history, math, chemistry, mechanics, whatever you teach? Is the other person going to teach it for you? I hear the teacher, well, I do what I'm supposed to. I teach reading. So if I teach reading, then they need to teach what they're supposed to do. Science, I teach my science. If they would teach them to read, then I wouldn't have to teach them to read because my job is to teach them science. If the elementary teachers would do what they're supposed to, then we would have a problem in the middle schools. And if the middle school teachers would do what they're supposed to, we wouldn't have a problem in high school.
Isn't that true?
If the middle school teachers actually had high expectations, we wouldn't have a problem in high school. And then the cycle just keeps going back, whose fault is it, who's supposed to teach what, when really and truly, if we put the students as our focus, we're going to all work together to teach and accomplish the goals. And I'm not really sure how you would teach science if you're not teaching reading, because within science, there's all sorts of cause and effect relationships, and teaching cause and effect is a reading skill, not a science skill. So if you're teaching content of any kind, you're really teaching reading if you're teaching content of any kind. Because the requirements for Common Core are to read much more complex levels of text at a much earlier stage. When I look at the samples for third grade, that's what elementary mostly looks at, is third grade samples, third, fourth, and fifth. It is nothing like what I looked at when I was in the third grade, and I'm sure it wouldn't be anything like what you looked at in the third grade. It's much harder. The writing prompts are harder. Just reading the text is harder. I was in a Common Core class today for K-3 reading intervention, and they put a passage in front of us that was a kindergarten passage about the civil rights movement. And it was a passage. It was not sight words or a Dolch list. It was a passage, and it was definitely not anything that I would place in front of a kindergartner at this point. So it is going to take all of us working as a team in order to accomplish reading across content areas and reading in general and writing within the Common Core. So I want you to think about what practices are in place that will allow you as an educator to meet the rigorous demands of the Common Core state standards, and what resources are in place that will allow us to do that. So right now I just want you to turn and talk for just a second, and then I'll call time in about 2 minutes. So what practices and what resources are already in place that you do in the classroom every day to meet the requirements of Common Core? You can turn and talk.
I'm not in the classroom, so I'm not going to share
Sounds like a good something.
All right, let's hear from you all, you're the experts. What do we already have in place, that resource-wise that we can use? What resources do we already have in classrooms in Jackson Mesa? So I want to share one resource that you think would help you to accomplish the goal. Good nothing.
Well, one thing is a computer, any computer with internet access is a tremendous resource. If you're trying to work with your kids to have them on the correct reading level, if you go to lexile.com, you can check different texts that you're going to use in class, try to make sure that they're at the right level for the students. And there's a lot of websites that you can actually pull up, for your subject-specific text that you need. You can pull up a lot of articles that are at the level they're supposed to be with questions to kind of tie back to.
Right. We have any technology, like you said, Google, anything. I mean, if you just Google Common Core, text-dependent questions, or Common Core, reading across content areas, there's going to be articles to come up, there may be resources to come up. I do that all the time, just pull stuff up and say, okay, this is something I can use, or you can take something that somebody's already created and just change it a little. What practices do we have in place already that we can use to accomplish this goal?
We're teaching the students to go back within the text and find evidence to support their question, the answers to their question as well as writing. So we're teaching them that strategy.
Great. We're not going into Common Core testing next year having not had any training. You all have been trained some schools may have had more training than others, some teachers may have had more training than others, but we are using some of the practices that Common Core recommends already. And so it's not going to be next year learning all brand new strategies. And some of the strategies that you did forever ago, if you taught for a long time, because they say, oh, this is new teachers, why would you talk about, well, because everybody that's in here is new to Jackson Mesa, this community, you're a brand new teacher. So some of you may have taught a long time, and you know how things kind of go around in a circle. So you may have strategies and even materials that you can use to make, to achieve our goal already in place.
How many of you guys use close reading or know what close reading is? You read it once, go back over and pull things out of the text, right? Close reading is a very effective tool for reading.
And what practices will we need to put into place to accomplish the goal? And what resources are we going to need to accomplish the goal? We can just kind of share out on that. What practices do you think that we need to learn more about? And what resources do you think we need in order to accomplish the goal?
But for those kindergartners that you were talking about, what in the world can you give to them about the civil rights?
Sorry.
Anything other than civil rights that's going to be something that they can take and run with. I mean, is that too much to expect for a kindergarten? I feel like I think that's a little bit low.
I think it definitely is, looking at it right now. I think if we had, did raise your hand, can teach kindergarten in here? Okay, do you touch on the civil rights movement at all whatsoever? Okay, that's a starting point. Martin Luther King Jr., beginning discussions, talking to our students in different ways. I know that at our school we have talked about expectation. And unfortunately, in education, we don't expect enough. Students are quite capable if we expected more, would they achieve more? Possibly. Most students come to us having very poor language development and very poor vocabulary development, and they're not exposed to rich text. So the premise behind this is the earlier you expose them to rich text and vocabulary development, the more likely they are to latch onto it. So if we wait until third grade to introduce them to a higher level text or a complex text, they don't accomplish much learning from that because they've never seen it before. So while we wouldn't expect maybe the kindergarten to read the passage independently, we would read it to them and then closely read and go through and dissect the passage, take it apart, teach them some words. Little kids especially love to learn new words because they have never used it before. They love to use a new word. So it may be that you take that passage and you pull out a few words, and if they use that word correctly, anytime from then on, that's a buzzword, or that's a super smart word, or whatever you choose to call it, and they get something from it because they've used it appropriately. And so the point is that we have to really expect more out of these students. I'm new to JC2 this year, and as a whole, the expectations were very low when I went there for the students. And I think that the teachers that are in here from JC2 would agree with me on that. That the expectation was not there for students to achieve, and therefore, when we looked at our scores, they don't achieve. However, this year we've raised the bar a great deal, and we are already seeing our results. And it's not because we have all brand new kids, because we don't. So, expecting more can often end up in achieving more. If we expect you to be late for a meeting, and we expect you to not show up, then you might do that. But if we expect you to do it, and you know that you're expected to, you're more likely to do it. And that makes a big difference for students as well.
Can I say something else?
Sure.
We're doing the literacy program right now where we're encouraging reading. And I think that that's got to help at some level. You know, if we're trying to get them to read more complex, rich text and pull answers from that, then the fact that they're reading on a regular basis during the week, during class time even, has got to assist them in their ability.
Yes, I would agree fully that in most modern schools, K-12, reading, writing, speaking, science, geography, and history are taught as separate subjects. Why is it? More than likely it's because when I went to school, the teacher said, okay, get out your English book, put away your math, get out your English book, it's English time, put away your math, it's English time. All separate. They have a separate folder, they have a separate book, they have a separate everything. And in Common Core, most of what you see is integrated units, where there is no more science textbook, no more social studies textbook, no more history textbook. It's all integrated into a set of texts that are exemplar texts that they say, these are texts that the level of text that our students need to be able to analyze and write about. Because I don't know very many people that need to, the little video I showed last time about, you don't need to be able to go and tell about your very best holiday in a job. They don't really care about that in a job. I've called several friends this week that are professionals. I called a nurse practitioner. I said, how often do you read in your job? I just want to know, how often do you read? All day long. I called an architect. How often do you read? How often do you use math? How often do you cross math and reading? Every day. And if we're teaching students to tell us what they think about everything, we're not teaching them the skills that they need to be effective in the workplace. Because nobody asks the nurse practitioner, what do you think? She asks, what does the science of medicine tell you? That she doesn't want to know if the person just, I think you'll get better. I don't want a doctor to tell me, I think I'll get better. I want a doctor to be able to tell me, I've studied this medicine. I've studied the results of this medicine, and this medicine is effective. If an architect is building me something, I want to know for sure that they have studied and know what they've read the plans, and that they've read the effectiveness of the materials that they used, and that they know that my house is going to stand up. And so if all we ever do is ask them their opinion, and we ask questions like, well, we just read this article about civil rights, and it said one of the exemplar texts for high school is a letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. Martin Luther King. And they read it, and then you say, okay, well, how would you feel if you were in jail? That's not helping the student, because then all they're going to do is just relate to their own personal experiences, but they're not analyzing the text. And they don't even have to really be able to read the text in order to respond to that question. So we have to make sure that when we ask questions of our students, that we expect them to be able to read the text that we're talking about, and that we expect them to be able to analyze the text that we're talking about. Sometimes we say that everything's been separated because textbooks, they're different. Teachers, departmentalization. I mean, I'm a fan of self-contained. The fifth grade teachers back there might fall apart. I'm a fan of self-contained because when I have everything and I know I got to teach it all, then I'm going to make sure I teach it. But when I don't like to share my kids. I don't want to share my kids with anybody because I don't know what they do over there. I'll share my curriculum all day long. I'll share what I'm using and let you use it too because I want us all to be the best. But I don't want to share my kids because I don't know what you're doing. I know what I'm doing. So sometimes people will say that's the reason it's all separate and I only want to be responsible for one subject and I don't want to just collaborate and share. Some of those off-the-record suggestions, like, is that on TCAP? Science social doesn't really count. I didn't say that though. I'm the principal in the building. And I'm not really telling you not to teach science and social, but I'm just telling you that the report card and all, how many of you ever heard some, yeah, sometimes like that, well, we don't have to do that, but they need to know it. So it doesn't matter if it's just on the test, if they need to know it. We would hope that what they need to know is what's on the test. Teacher preferences. Sometimes I don't really like to teach reading, or I don't like to teach science. And I definitely don't want to teach reading within science because I went to school to be a science teacher, not a reading teacher. I went to school to be a math teacher, not a reading teacher. And you have to do all of that together. And then sometimes the student preferences. We see them struggling, and by nature, most teachers are nurturers. And I can't read it. Can't. And you know we can't. And you also know, as the educator, you know that he probably didn't eat that morning. And you know that. Because he didn't like the breakfast. But he didn't have breakfast at home. And you also know that his parents have issues and he really only has one parent at home. And you also know, and so you don't really want to put the complex text in front of them because they're telling you it's hard and they don't want to do it. And so we have to change our thinking as well as their thinking that yes, you can do it. It may be hard, but we have to teach them that there's an appropriate amount of struggle. So I'm going to show you how to do it. We have to model everything. I'm going to show you how to do it, and then I'm going to expect you to do it. But we have to model what we expect and then check what we expect. We can't just say, well, you know, he's from you don't understand. You know, he's abused and he's the very one that needs to know the most because he may be the one to stop that cycle. And if you don't ever put it in front of, he may be Dr. Ben Carson. You know, I know y'all all know that story, Dr. Ben. Okay. He may be Dr. Ben Carson one day. But if you just say, you know what, you're just going to sit in the back. You're poor. You're not ever going to read it. It's a difficult text. He might be the very one that does. He might be or she might be the one that comes up with the cure for cancer. But if you never take the time to be sure and place it in front of them and do that hard thing and say, I'm going to help you with it, but then once I've taught it to you, I'm going to expect you to do it as well. Are you up for the challenge? Yes, I think most of us would say we are. Some of you may say, no, I'm not, in which case there is paperwork for you in Nashville if you want to retire. I mean, it's a huge challenge, I would say so. I'm halfway there. I'm at my 15th year. My husband and I had multiple conversations this week. He's like, you sure you want to do this? What's retirement look like at 15 years? And I said, no, he's like, you just really, really want those kids to know, don't you? I really do. I want those kids to know. I really, really do think that the students in America are just as capable, if not more capable than others. We take everybody. They always compare us to China. China doesn't take everybody in school. They pick who goes to school. We don't do that. We take everybody. But what we've also done is we said, well, we take everybody so we can achieve. We take everybody so we can achieve more, I would think. We need to take everybody and make sure that we do. What are some of the solutions for these challenges? Number one, engaging your media specialist. That is the correct, appropriate, politically correct term for a librarian. Engage the media specialist. I had to learn this. I did not know this last year, and I was taught. So now I know it's a media specialist. School counselors are professional school counselors. They are not guidance counselors. So I'm just telling you, it's a mistake you may not want to make. If you're a new teacher, make sure you know the terms of the people that they, that could be it. They're media specialists, and they are a golden resource for reading in content areas and reading across the curriculum. Because they know all kinds of stuff. They read books about different kinds of things. Most of them like to read. I've not met very many librarians that don't like to read. And they are a great resource. Depending on the scheduling in your building, sometimes they have more free time than someone else. Not to say that it's free, but they may be collaborating with the instructional coach or other teams and use that resource. They may really want to, because a lot of library media specialists come out of the classroom. They may really want to collaborate with them. They may really want to develop units still. They may really enjoy certain things. Figure out what it is that they like to do and then use that to your advantage. If it's that they love to just collect books for your next unit of study, tell them what you're getting ready to study and see if they can find some resources. They may know, they see those books come in and out, so they know what they have and what they don't have. And they're always more than willing to when they find something. Or as they said, I don't have that, but I know that the librarian over at Thelma Barker does, and I'll get it for you. And they can trade. So make sure that you use all the resources in your building. They may have text sets. They may have the ability to search different things online and a different continuum of skills. We have our librarian right now, our media specialist. I'm just bad on that. Our media specialist is planning units to meet the writing and research standards for grade 5. She's working on informational text for grades 3 and 4 because when we looked at our data, that was their lowest areas. So I just went to her and I said, I have to have you to do these. I have to have you because the teachers are going to do these and they're going to focus on, I have to have you. She said, sure, let me know. Just very happy to do so. So don't forget that there's a lot of human resources in your building that you may not be capitalizing on as much as could benefit you. Inquiry learning and a flipped classroom. Is anybody here familiar with flipped classroom? Is anybody here trying flipped classroom?
I looked into it, but I was gonna ask, is there anybody in the district doing that? The problem you got is when you flip it, if they don't have access to the media, you know, you gotta figure out a way to make sure they get access to the media. Maybe I'm not going to the right person, I need to do that.
Right. Is anybody here trying flipped classroom? Or doing flipped classroom? I didn't even know what it was. I was like, my classroom is flipped, what does that mean? Last year, Ms. Carter, we did a whole day on flipped classroom training. And basically, it's that you put the media or the research in front of the child before you ever teach it. And so they have time to read it and do all their stuff. And basically, they do it all at home, and then they come back and talk about it. Because in upper grade classrooms, middle school and high school, a lot of times say, we don't have time to discuss. We don't have time to get to the point of writing because we're just going over the information. I got to cover it, I got to cover it, I got to cover it. So that does have a lot of barriers with being able to get through all of curriculum. Then they say, well, what if the students don't do it? You know, what if they just don't do it? So there are barriers to it, but it is something if you're interested in worth researching and just looking at it because they have seen success with that. Okay, collaborate with your colleagues. This is just a little bit of food for thought. I know that my JCT people know that I believe in collaboration. And in order to be great, you have to collaborate. I don't know everything, you don't know everything. Maybe nobody's ever told you that. I don't know everything, and you don't know everything. But together we know a whole lot. And I've learned tons from the teachers that I've taught with, and instructional coaches that I've worked with, and principals that I've worked with. When you want to learn something new, what do you do to learn about that subject? If I want to learn how to kayak, which I don't ever want to learn how to kayak, I would read about it more than likely. I might watch some videos about learning to kayak. I would probably talk to other people that kayak to gather the information. So we tend to act like reading is a separate subject when really and truly, especially once you pass 3rd grade, the whole purpose is for them to read to learn new information. The little issue with that is that means K-3, we do have to do our job and make sure that they've learned to read. And if they get to us and they haven't, we still need to be experts in figuring out what's the issue. Is it phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency? Is it environmental? Is it lack of vocabulary? What are the issues that we can go back and try to target and fix? In our school, we're really pushing vocabulary and academic vocabulary. All those years ago when Tennessee academic vocabulary came out, my principal was Linda Johnston at Thelma Barker, and she came in and she had these folders and these binders and all this. We're going to do Tennessee academic vocabulary. And I was one of those teachers that said, well, Miss Johnston says, so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to have my folders ready, and I have my folders, and I taught my kids. And I thought that everybody in the district did that because she said it was a district mandate. So I thought everybody did it, you know. So I go along, and I go to these other schools that have had the product. Oh, we don't do that. That's just like only if you want to. Vocabulary is the number one thing that I would spend my time doing if you're in a content area. If they learn the vocabulary, and I mean learn it, not just know the definition of it. They know the vocabulary to the point that they can use it. They know the nuances of the word. They know the affixes of the word. They really know about the words and they're able to use them. That completely changes their ability to read science and social studies and technical texts. If they can't get past the word revolution, they're going to lose the whole meaning of the passage. Because revolution is one of the most important words probably in the passage if you're reading about the American Revolution. You can't understand the American Revolution if you don't understand the word revolution. Now some people will say, well, you have to teach it in context and it's too much. I disagree. That's my own personal opinion. You can teach vocabulary definitions in isolation. Teach the definitions. When you get to it, it's sort of like the flipped classroom. They're not so unfamiliar with the word that they lose the meaning of the text. You can teach those words, get them to learn those words, practice with the words, play with the words, have games with the words. Capitalize on your vocabulary so that when you get to the texts that involve that vocabulary, they know how to use them. They know how to engage with them, and they're not terrified of a word because it has 14 letters in it. But there's no way for them to understand a passage if they don't understand the vocabulary within it. You can learn something new or just revise something old. When I was teaching in fourth grade, higher order thinking skills were the big buzzword back then. Bloom's taxonomy, you make sure all of the levels, you have a question for every single one, and we still do that. And Common Core suggests that you use the highest level of questioning. However, when I was going through it a long time ago, it was evaluate was asking that question, what did you think? However, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about a high-level question that requires a student to analyze and decide what the author was probably thinking. Why did the author include this piece of information? How is this piece of information, how is this vocabulary word integral to the understanding of the passage? How would the passage change if this one word was removed? That is a higher order question, but you're still using higher order questions. So if you understand higher order questions, all you gotta do is just tweak it just a little bit to change it to text-dependent higher order questions. Because sometimes when I present ideas, there's, oh, we've been doing that, we did that, we do that. You are doing higher level questions, but they may not be text-dependent. So you have to make sure that you're including all the components that you need in order to be effective, but it may not be something brand new. Or it may, I was actually writing text-dependent questions with a teacher that I was lucky enough to have a buddy across the hall that came and loved teaching school as much as I did, and she was from North Carolina. And apparently North Carolina is light years ahead of us in education, because they were doing this very same kind of stuff 8 years ago. And so we sat by her pool in the summer, and she was like, "I'm teach you how to write these, okay? Has to be about the text." So I learned, but she didn't call them that. She just called them something else. I don't even know what she called them. But it was this. It was the exact same concept. So knowing how to do something and just tweaking it a little bit can change your whole entire perspective on teaching. It's not all new. It's not all going to change. You just have to maybe change one little practice, and it'll be effective. But text-dependent questions are not low-level, literal, or recall questions. So that doesn't mean that you just say, okay, who is the main character? Do they have to look in the text to see who's the main character? Yes, but that's not a higher order thinking question. They need to be able to know how to answer that question. That's not writing a true text-dependent question that's higher level. They are focused on comprehension strategies. They're not going to be focused on that, like a compare and contrast question or cause and effect. They use those, but that's not what a text-dependent question is. And they are also not just questions. They can only be answered with evidence in the text. They can be literal in the level of just checking for understanding, like I said, but they also have to involve analysis, breaking something apart, synthesis, putting it back together, or evaluation. Focus on word, sentence, and paragraph, as well as larger ideas, themes, or events. Now, in my training today, they talked about, you asked how would I do that with kindergarten. Well, instead of just focusing on the whole passage, they talked about getting all the way down to how a passage is a bunch of sentences put together. So what if we went back and actually taught kids how to comprehend a sentence? Never really thought of it like that. What if we just taught them to comprehend a sentence and really take that sentence in and reflect on that sentence? So you could pull out specific sentences, teach them the words in the sentence, let them say the sentence, and then take hold of a few words in there, and then they could learn the meanings of some of those new words. They also focus on the paragraph as a whole. In close reading, the strategy that Mr. Gillespie was talking about, you're supposed to read the whole passage out loud to them first, but then you go back paragraph by paragraph, chunking out each paragraph and figuring out what was the author probably thinking during this paragraph. Why did he include the words here? Why did he say this now? Why do you think he's telling us this now? Why do you think this character has just been introduced? Why do you think this person let us have this information? What's the purpose of it? And then themes or events, especially within science and social studies. The order of the events is very important in history. So why is it included right now? Why do you think this happened right now? One of the things we read today was about a little girl named Bessie Coleman. Anybody know that? She was the first African-American, anybody know? Pilot. But she started in France because she was born in the 1800s and was a child of sharecroppers. And so it says, I lived in, I don't even remember what state it was, in 1892. And I had to walk 4 miles to school. And my parents were sharecroppers and they had 13 kids. So we were working on writing some text-dependent questions, and I said, mine would be, what details in the passage help you to explain why Bessie had to walk to school? Because that's a third grade passage, so most kids, because we're egocentric people in general, and children are even more egocentric. They're gonna think that that story's happening right now. Even though they're gonna see that date, they're gonna pass right over that. And they're gonna think that that passage is happening right now. So I wanted them to really key in on those two sentences that talked about who her parents were as sharecroppers, when they would have to discuss that vocabulary word, and the time period in which it was taken. There was no bus transportation to school during that time, and her parents were sharecroppers. So even if they're habit, she wouldn't have been one that they would have picked up. As we went on, looked at the passage, talked about that she went, there's just one sentence in it that I almost thought was one of those questions they were gonna ask me about which question didn't belong, which sentence didn't belong, because it says that they had pilots in France, they had female pilots in France. And I thought, that's kind of out of order here. But as I continued to read, one of my questions became, why did the author include this sentence in this paragraph? Because later we were going to find out that that's where she had to go to study. Because they did not have, every flight school turned her down because of two reasons. She was a woman and she was African American. So they wouldn't let her in. But if I had known that about France, I might not have understood the whole passage and then the timeline of her becoming a pilot. They focus on different portions of the text in order to enhance reading. So you don't have to have a 30-page story in order to have an effective text. And we're used to it in elementary school. We're used to having that long story and the building background and the vocabulary words is on Monday, and then we do this on Tuesday, and then we do this on Wednesday because we have to read the story 3 times. I mean, I was indoctrinated into that. You read that story one time to them, they partner read it, and then they read it on their own. That's what you do. Well, we're still in the close reading, but instead of doing it of a 30 or 40-page story, we may do it of a much richer text, of a shorter passage. But it's much richer text. It's something that they will actually need to analyze and not just tell about their feelings, and it's mostly nonfiction. You can include a prompt for writing and discussion questions. If you just think about text-dependent questions and close reading, they go together. So at the very end of the close reading and the text-dependent questions, there's normally an open-ended question that will require them to write to the text. And we talked about all that in the writing training last time about how they're going to have to write to at least one text, maybe 2, maybe 3. So they have to know how to read about the text and then be able to write about it, because you certainly can't write about it if you can't read about it. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago, I knew that I needed to read about it. Up until that point, I didn't know that much about cancer. And because I'm one of those people that thinks knowledge is power, I decided when they told me that he wasn't going to make it much longer, that I wanted to know what it was going to look like when he died. So I want to know what that's going to look like. I need to be prepared for that because I'm a teacher, so I need to know. So I started reading articles. What does it look like to die? What's it going to look like because he has cancer? What's it going to be like? And somebody said, ooh, that's awful. Why would you do that? Because the knowledge gave me the power to, when I experienced it, understand it. And I could understand it better because I have read it.
I like the point that you bring up. However, how can we do text-dependent questions in math, like middle school math? The reason why I ask is most of the story problems we come across are through census at the most. We teach them to look at the questions and then do the details, but you don't ask stuff like, well, what was the writer feeling when they wrote this question?
Right, you may not ask questions like that, but you're still teaching them to use the text to defend their answer. You may have them to use a word problem, and then we do a little strategy called RICE, where they have to, at the end, explain how they solved the problem in words. And so there are probably words in the problem that help them to know how to solve it. So that's a way to, reference them back. If the text is the word problem, then all they're going to have to do is reference back to what words in the word problem help you to know what to do.
But isn't that simple recall?
No, because they're having to, it's not what words are in the word, what words in the word problem allowed them to analyze and know. See, they had to analyze. If the words are there more than, less than, those words, they had to analyze those words to know what operation to do. Because sometimes you might have more and you're supposed to add. You might have the word more and you're supposed to subtract. So they had to use words together to let them know. And that's one way that you could do it. But you're right that in math, it's not nearly as easy as it is in science and social studies. But that is one way that you can do it, is to have them take out words from the problems and then tell how they use those words to let them know what math operations do. And in general, when you do that, then you are participating in helping the writing teacher, the reading teacher, the science teacher, the social teacher, because you're getting them to write about a topic that they don't normally write about. You're getting them to write in a subject that they don't normally write about. And so that's how you're able to do that. One of the things in Common Core also is reading technical texts, which is sets of instructions. And so if you're doing a math problem and if there's 10 steps in it, they have to be able to read the steps. And so you can make text-dependent questions about a technical text like the steps to dividing fractions. You can get on any website, just about get online, just Google directions for dividing fractions. And it's going to come step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and it's going to have words and pictures of math problems. And so that's a technical text. And lots of students are not familiar with technical texts, recipes, sets of instructions, and those are skills that you have to be able to do. When I got in my niece's Christmas present, it had like 30 pages of instructions on how to put that together. And I was like, ooh, this is the day I missed my dad, because reading those instructions was a daunting task for me, and I can read well. But reading that type of text is not something I do often. So it was different than encountering just a regular nonfiction or fiction text. So that's one thing, steps in a process, you can make some text-dependent questions about things like that. You could print out the instructions for how to solve a problem and have some questions about that. When you're writing or reviewing a set of questions, consider the following 3 categories. Questions that assess themes and central ideas. So if the theme is the American Revolution, then you're going to want your questions to point back to whatever standards you're covering about the American Revolution. What is it that you want them to know? Is that what I've been saying all year? Well, what is it? What do we want them to know? When you're doing science or social studies, it is teaching reading. What do you want them to walk away knowing? And you can't do a lesson plan, even just to get it turned in, to get it checked off by whoever's checking it, if you don't know what you want them to know. What do you want them to know, and what do you want them to be able to do? Do you want them to be able to identify the causes of the American Revolution? Okay, then you got a starting point. Is this article going to help them be able to identify the causes of the American Revolution? If it's not, then you don't need that one. Your text needs to line up with what you're wanting them to know and be able to do. Questions that assess knowledge of vocabulary. If you're studying the American Revolution or any other topic in science or social studies, there are certain vocabulary and knowledge that they have to go away with. Or maybe that you were really expecting them to come with. So you may have to backtrack a little bit and say, okay, you may not know all the vocabulary associated with this, but let's talk about these words and what these words are and why these words are here. And some words are multiple meaning words. So you can't just teach them one meaning of it. You've got to teach them how to use the context to understand the meaning of the word within the passage that they're reading. And then questions that assess syntax and structure. When I first went to training on this, I was like, I don't know exactly what that means. I knew what the words meant, but I didn't know what it looked like. So I started researching, and syntax and structure talk about those multiple meaning words, how's it being used, as well as the structure of the word, and the affixes included. So one thing I have a lot of teachers do is if they have a word that has multiple forms, for example, last week it was weather tools, and most of the weather tools had meter at the end of them. And so instead of just teaching them what each weather tool did, we also had a word study lesson on what do you think it means? This is barometer, thermometer, hygrometer. What are you seeing? They all have meter at the end of them. So what does meter probably mean? And instead of just overlooking that and you go, well, yeah, they don't get that. They don't know that. They don't dive into language and figure out. So when you say to them, everything that ends in meter is something that's being measured, and then it's going to tell you what it's measuring. A thermometer is measuring temperatures. And, oh, I see THER at the front of that. Thermal, what other words do you know that have THER at the beginning of it, or in the word? And you can go off on this, they can create a whole list of words. And these kids know a lot of words. I was in a first grade class. What was that word that student said at that time? Do you remember? I mean, we just bought what? I said, what? Which one? Sabotage. First grade. And she was reading a story about the clubhouse. There was a clubhouse and this kid, and she said, what is he trying to do? Why is he doing these actions in the story? What can you tell me? He said, I know. She said, okay, can you sit on the carpet? Yes. Okay, tell me the sabotage. He's trying to sabotage. You know what? And I said, okay, now you gotta tell what sabotage means. And so he told, that means you're trying to get them, you're trying to get them. And he was like, that's right. So, you know, he was a first grader. But when we take the opportunity to build on the words that we see there and not just look at it as, okay, can they read the passage? Can they answer the questions? What other instruction can you bring in that then they can apply somewhere else? So when they leave your room, then they know that meter is talking about something that's being measured. So now when they go to math, and they learn something else about meter. Oh, meter. Oh, that's the word part. That's why that means measurement, because meter is a term of measurement. So that's why they say barometer. And then they start to connect all those things together. And you have to model those connections just by thinking aloud. Okay, here's some examples. Not text dependent, and Casey at the back. I promise you, I told you all last time, Casey at the back will be on the part. Casey at the back will be on part. They said, these things, they said, nothing is brand new published for the Park assessment. Everything that's on that assessment, every passage that's on the assessment has been authored already. And that's, you know, so we say, we don't have it, we don't know, we just don't know that we have it. So I've gone through, I said, Casey at the back will be on there. Go through and look, just find the authors. Robert Frost poems, they're gonna be on there. Letter from a Birmingham jail, that's gonna be on there. Gettysburg Address, that's gonna be on there. Maybe not at my level, but it's gonna be there. Because they picked the text that they wanted them to know. In Casey at the back, Casey strikes out, describe a time when you failed at something. That's not text dependent. But what makes Casey's experience at bat humorous? Then they have to go back to the text, find out what made it humorous, and then give those details. In Letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King discusses nonviolent protest. Discuss in writing a time when you wanted to fight against something that you felt was unfair. What can you infer from King's letter about the letter that he received? So they have to use the text to do that, instead of just getting to tell all about what they would do. In the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln says, the nation is dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Why is equality an important value to promote? Instead, the Gettysburg Address mentions the year 1776. According to Lincoln's speech, why is this year significant to the events described in the speech? Does everybody see how those are different? But they're not that these aren't good questions, but since I don't think any of the schools in the district are like knocking out of the park 100% proficient in advance, we only have so much time. We might as well ask the questions that are going to benefit them the most and teach them the most skills all at once. If they want to tell you about what they like, you can do that at recess. That's what I was telling them. Oh, I so want to hear that. You can tell me at recess. No kids coming around me at recess in general. They're not coming to you. And then maybe at the end of the day, they're not going to tell you. But if they really, really want to tell you, they will come tell you. Then you need to know that they really want to tell you, and just listen to them, but not during your instruction time. This is not my computer, so. Creating text-dependent questions. Identify the core understandings and key ideas of the text. And this is you writing the questions. Start small to build confidence. So you're going to have some of those lower level questions just to get them started. In first grade, when you do read aloud, I have the teachers do think aloud. And if they ask a question, it's got to be text dependent, and they have to model. I know that the main character is because on page or in paragraph, whatever, they have to still have to cite the evidence. That's just to build confidence. You'll stay that way. Start small to build that confidence up. Target vocabulary and text structure. We talk about how to do that. Find the vocabulary that they have to know. Find word families for phonics and phonemic awareness. Also find concept words and words with that syntax and structure. If they all have a specific affix, include that, because then you're able to capitalize on your time and make it worth much more. So that when they see those words again, they've made that connection and they really understand them. Identify the standards. Tackle tough sections head on. This is what we talked about earlier with expectations. It's okay to say to the students, this is a tougher text, but we're going to read it, and this is how we're going to go about it. Have a plan for how you're going to do that, and then let them work through it. Create coherent sequences of text-dependent questions. So don't start at paragraph 5 if you're going to ask questions about paragraph 1. And don't start at the highest level of questioning. Start at the lowest and then build your way up, and start at the top of the passage and work your way down. But remember to go by sections. In middle and high school, that may be paragraphs. In elementary school, it may be going sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph. Identify the standards that are being addressed. That could be your reading standards, that could be your science standards and your reading standards, social studies standards, history standards, chemistry standards. What knowledge do I want them to come out of the class today with? If I teach biology or chemistry, there's a certain level of knowledge you want them to leave with. So what is that knowledge that you want them to leave with? And is the reading that we're doing going to give them that knowledge? Because if it's not, but it's on the right page, and you have your same lesson plans from last year, but you just really wanted to use those, don't use those. You look at what you want them to learn, and then find the text that matches that, and then use it. And if it's not the right level, you still got to keep looking. You can't just say, "Oh, I found a 3rd grade passage on weather." If you teach 6th grade, you got to go look for another passage. It's got to be on the right level. It needs to have the knowledge that you want them to have, and then you start to break it apart. And then create the culminating assessment. So once you know what you want to learn, and you target the vocabulary and the text structure, then you're going to actually create the culminating assessment, which would be this set of questions and the writing prompt, if you want to have a writing at the end. You have to create your assessment before you teach, because you have to know what you want them to learn. And so that's not necessarily the order everybody does it in. They're like, "Oh, I'm done with this unit, okay, I better create a test." No, you really need to create that assessment in the very beginning so that you know what your instruction is going to be about. You can't do that on the back end. That's got to be done in the beginning. Vocabulary development is a must-do. Multiple meaning words, affixes, word web, that's the activity I talked about before. It's all the forms. If there's an affix of any kind on the beginning or the end, you go through and have them create a web of all the words that have that. And then you have to go through specifically on that word and make sure that it meets the definition of that affix, and then what does that mean? And let them see all these words are interconnected, like the meter words. Shades of meaning, a word line. I got on Engage New York webpage. Y'all already on there, because they're not like Tennessee. They actually have all of their units published for their teachers, so that they don't have to go looking for stuff. And they have a kindergarten unit on there. And one of the words that they had in there about weather was frigid. And that was the kindergarten word. And I thought, that's okay. Kids can pull on with that. And then it had all the ways to go through it, and they would put it on a line. So they had warm, cold, hot, frigid, freezing. And then they had to put them on a line in a continuum of which word is the most extreme, and which word is the least extreme. Well, you know that a little kindergartner or first grader loves to go home and say, "Oh, it's frigid outside." And everyone says, "What?" Because you don't even know. Yes, I do know what that means. It means that it's very, very, very cold. It's not like you just need a coat or a sweater. It's really cold. It is frigid outside. Your fingers could get frostbite. And then they start to move, they want to learn these big words. So that's an easy way to just incorporate that. Just put them on a word line of the degree of the meaning. And then academic vocabulary, teaching, reinforcing it, and having them include it in their writing. Okay, that's good. Are there any questions? I kind of feel like, after it's over. Because see, I had all my stuff saved for my PowerPoint presentation, and then my computer got a virus a few weeks ago. And when I went back to get all that information, it was gone. So I got to look for it again. But I learned some more stuff in looking for it. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, well, I enjoyed being back with you, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
If you didn't sign the sign-in sheet, I'll have it up there in just a second.
kind of stuff. But I looked at the website and said, nothing behind it.
See y'all later.
I guess the concept is